My name is John Mertsock. I'm a teacher at Letchworth Central School. Welcome to This Is My Story. It's one in a series of events to celebrate Castile's bicentennial. I've been a Castilian for about a decade. I've been teaching at Letchworth Central School for 11 years. Our guests today have lived here a little longer than 10 years. What I'll do is introduce everyone. I hope I've got everyone on the list. And then I'll kind of ask a few questions to spark some conversation to talk about Castile's heritage. I think that in these days of fast pace, looking forward, constantly moving, it's nice to stop once in a while to look around us and maybe even look into the past to see where we've come from and realize where we are going. Today we have some very distinguished members of the community. I'll begin with, let's see, who we have over here. Miss Arlene, Arlene Baker. We have Marietta Barlow. We have Ray Weiss. Calvin Golyer. My neighbor, Jim Van Arsdale. Let's see, Corky Hall. Ron Ballinger. Linda Little. And I think we have Hal and Marian Seymour. There they are. Neighbors too?
Yeah.
All right.
Pick an extension.
Okay, yep, right down the road. Did I miss anyone?
Frank Walkley.
Frank Walkley is here as well. Hello, sir. All right. So I guess I'll start. I can ask a few of the questions, and we can have some dialogue too from the audience, I think, at any time. Or if anyone has any questions or additions, that would be fine. I think we're looking at this as sort of an informal discussion about Castile. The first one is quite a simple question, I think. What are your fondest memories of living in Castile? Anybody can go first. Volunteers.
Playing outdoors, hide and seek until the streetlights came on.
There you go. Yeah.
I have that on my list too, Elmer.
Do you? Okay, Marietta, do you want to tell us what you have?
Well, I just hiking around through the country and playing games up on by the church in the churchyard at night. And as she said, when the street lights went on, everybody dashed off home. Mm-hmm. And then we had the swimming hole, not a swimming pool. We had the swimming hole.
Yeah.
And the coach in the town taught us all how to swim there.
I used a syrup can, empty gallon syrup can. My father told us to put that in front of us, and we had the shallow end up there where the creek came in, swimming hole. That's where you learned. If you could take your feet off and get to the other side and touch, you were swimming.
Arlene, what do you have?
Yeah, I remember swimming up there, Beechwood Avenue, and we took the, what was the Red Cross course there for saving, and I saved Ronnie Barlow's life, her brother-in-law's life. Then I remember school and church, and I sang in the choir in church for years. And those, and the library, are my memories of where I spent my time.
Mr. Weiss, what are some of your fondest memories of living in Castile?
I think one of the things I enjoyed a lot was that we could go out and find a vacant field somewhere and get a bunch of kids together and choose up sides and have a baseball game. And there wasn't any umpires or any parents to get in an argument with each other or anything. We just went out there and had a good time. We had maybe somebody's jacket for first base and somebody else's hat over there for second and somebody's something else for third. And we had an awful good time without having to wear uniforms or have anybody tell us. We just a bunch of kids, and we could do that in Castile, and it was a lot of fun.
Well, Mr. Golyer.
I have to say about the same thing everybody else is. I think it was based on the fact we had a school in town, and everybody knew each other. I think we knew every teacher in school, and the teachers knew us and knew our parents. And so in the evening there was hide and seek and tag. In the winter time we'd go sledding down Buffalo Street Hill, and you'd end up down to the old Litchsack. There weren't enough cars to bother us, and they didn't sand the roads. and we would ride behind cars on a sled with a rope over it, taking in all that nice leaded gasoline fumes. And there's that sense of community. That was the great thing. And I think the population was more stabilized then. And Ray peddled milk. He knew everybody in town.
You delivered to our house and those calves rose up like that, you know.
Right. Mr. Van Arsdale? Yes, sir.
I have so many good memories that I have to single them down. I think the thing I enjoyed most was the celebration of the 4th of July. First we'd collect fireworks up at Horning's grocery store on the corner. We'd come down with 2 or 3 cents or a nickel or a dime and get the fireworks and gradually get our supply ready for the 4th. And then early in the morning we'd start celebrating. And then later in the morning we had competitions down here at the library that Dr. Mary Green put on, the 3-legged race, the bag race, and potato race, and all those things. And those were a lot of fun.
I guess I remember scouting as much as anything. We had a large Boy Scout troop, very active, went camping all the time, really. A group of us would just get together and go camping. We were down in the park. We got thrown out of the park. Out behind the youth hostel and a lot of different places. And I guess I remember sledding. We didn't slide on the streets when I came, but we went up behind the cemetery. There was quite a hill that came down towards Main Street. It's all overgrown with trees now. I don't think you could even slide there, but we used to slide from there, and if we picked the barbed wire fence up and hooked it on top of the post, we could go under the fence, and if you made an abrupt right, we could down Main Street on the sidewalk all the way to the sanitarium. So
Sounds like a good ride.
it was a very good ride. I think I remember a few broken arms from somebody getting hit, but it was a lot of fun growing up here. Plus, my mother would send us all out. She didn't have to worry about us. At 5 o'clock, she'd holler and holler to come home for supper, and we might be all the way to the railroad tracks or anywhere. As we didn't, not like now where you're scared to be out. Really, you wouldn't let your kids go out and roam around like we did.
Ms. Little?
Well, I didn't move here till I was 8 years old, so I guess you could call me an import too. But one of my earliest memories is going to movies on a Saturday morning at the old town hall. And the fact that you could walk to just about anything, the basketball games and dances and so on at the school were easy access for all of us. We didn't have to hitch a ride, we could walk there. And the freedom that we had around town, you could roller skate at anybody's sidewalk and ride your bicycle into Letchworth Park. And nobody thought a thing about the danger or anything.
Mr. and Mrs. Seymour, I believe?
Well, I'm just going to enlarge it. I can remember sliding down Main Street Hill in the snowstorm. No cars, say at 9 at night. And the other thing was they had wonderful dances on Saturday nights at the town hall. And I was too young to date, but I'd walk down to them, and then I had to leave at a certain hour, probably 10:30, and meet my dad. He'd always be about at Elias's, and we'd meet there. And the other thing, I was looking for a picture, probably more people here also remember, of Rube Billings and his wagon with 2 horses, and that was the garbage collection in Castile. And I know Hal's father had a picture that was out behind the post office, the one that burned, but I couldn't find it. But I just thought that was unique. That was our garbage collection back then.
Yeah.
Hal, you bet. Other quick.
Things we did years ago and never could do today. You'd be thrown in jail. Ray talking about knowing everybody in town and whatnot. I can remember Ray and some of his buddies racing cars way up in the back of the woods. You know, the dust just a-flying, and You couldn't do that today, the cops would be right there in 2 minutes. I had an old Model T that I used to drive around town, and icy weather, I could go on in most of the streets and put on, it just had rear brakes on it. You could go around and around and around and around and then down the hill, you know. If they ever did that today, the cops would be there in force. Well, you can't do that, you know, that's dangerous business. But the old Model T, I used to go down and see Cal years ago. He had a dog that always come out and he liked my tires. But I got an old coil that I found, you know, another model coil, and I hooked it up there so anybody that touched it, you know, didn't touch it the second time. Well, dog comes over and tries it again. And he went ki-yi over under the porch and he didn't come out for 3 days.
Sorry, my hearing aid batteries just ran out and I can't hear a word you say.
Probably just as well.
It might be good.
I'm trying to write it, you can't see either.
Ray used to ride a motorcycle too.
I can't see good enough to know who it was. I think he was talking about me.
You see that? Hell.
One of my fondest memories is going to Washington D.C. with Dr. Mary. She took 5 of us who would not have been able to go otherwise. And when we were there, Marian Anderson sang out on the memorial, wasn't allowed to sing inside. And Mrs. Eleanor Roosevelt was there. And you know, remember, she changed that, so they were able to go inside and sing. And that was the last time that Dr. Mary took any people, because remember, Junior Randall made it so hard for her that she never took any more.
I was the next class and she didn't take us.
She didn't take anyone after us.
Anybody else? Did I miss anyone? Yes, sir.
I don't know if anybody else has spoken about falling through the ice on the Roderick Pond, but I did. Fred Golyer and Hugh Cardigan and Bob Horn took me up to our house and gave me a rub down, and they shook the house. The thing I remember about being in the library itself was that the double pictures that would be put on a frame, and you'd hold it up to your face, and you'd really get a 3-dimension vision through that device.
Right.
It's quite interesting.
Yeah. Anyone else for the first section?
I was thinking
Yes, sir.
about, I was reading a 4th of July report in 1939, Castilian, which really wasn't very long ago. They started with a hymn and had public prayer, and then they had a double-header ball game.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a happy memory.
Right. I think Mr. DeGolyer is referring to the Castilian newspaper. There's a copy of it on the wall back here behind Mr. Van Arsdale. I'm not sure when that went out of production, but if you can check out some of them around the library, they're very interesting to see and read some of the stories in them. I'm sure it would add to what we're talking about today. I guess the next part we'll talk about changes. What are some positive changes that you've seen in the community over the years? How about we'll start with Marian?
Wow. Well, there is a low growth. We have new houses, and I can remember when we probably had, I don't think I'm exaggerating to say 5 grocery stores. I could almost point them out on Main Street where they were, and up to the depot, and we're very happy that we have the one that we do have now. That's positive. We might not have it, otherwise.
Right, the recent facelift.
Right.
Looks pretty nice.
Yes, it does. It's an attribute to the community.
Absolutely. Mr. Seymour?
Well, up and down Main Street, my father was a mail carrier for a good number of years. When the mail wanted to go out from the post office, they just lugged it up to the depot and they hung it on a pole. The train came by, they threw the mail out, and they had a hook that would grab the mail and send it on to Buffalo. By the time we got to Buffalo, it was all sorted.
Mrs. Little?
Well, I guess I have to state the obvious right now, and that's the sewer system in Castile.
Mhm.
It's been a long time coming. And I think that is a major improvement.
Mr. Ballinger, do you think there's some positive changes you've seen since you moved here?
Well, as a 40-some-year member of the fire department, I guess the modernization of our fire equipment and the building that we've got now compared to where we used to be in a little bitty narrow wooden building next to Lorraine's restaurant is where we used to sit. Now we've almost outgrown this building with our equipment, but we've modernized that quite a bit really. And through federal grants, we've got a lot of equipment that we probably wouldn't have had otherwise.
First ambulance was an old hearse.
Yeah, we had an old hearse for an ambulance, and then we moved to a bigger thing, and now we're actually buying used equipment because the price has gone so high, but we're still getting modern equipment. We just updated our Jaws of Life just here within the last couple months, and that was $28,000 of that, but that was all a grant, so we've done that, updated that. Our trucks are all getting much more modern.
Very good.
When, speaking of the fire company, when we were first married, I moved out of the village, down 19A there, and still remember the fire company. When there was an alarm, old Gert Alcox, used to be the telephone operator, where she plugged cords and stuff in there, and she always received the call and blew the siren. She just reached around and pushed a button. When she pushed a button, she'd call me on the phone. And after that, we had 5 phones around the village, so all the fire calls come into one of those phones, and they'd push a button and blow the siren. But now everything's out of Warsaw.
When I was, first started working the telephone office, all the fire calls came into the telephone office.
Yeah.
And we rang the bell, we rang the button, and then everybody would call in, everything on the thing would drop down, and you just start plugging it in and tell them where the fire was. And they'd come, and the firemen too, they got all their
Yeah.
information through the telephone office.
You probably worked with Gert, didn't you?
Yes.
Yeah.
Anybody else have some positive changes you can think of?
When I first came to the village, I came to the
Did
village
anybody
after
tell
it was
about the time
Ballinger.
the window blew up at the school?
I came in '57
Is that
when
what
we
you're
got
talking
here.
about now, things
You
that
know,
happened there?
These other gentlemen were talking about the baseball teams up in
Oh.
the fields.
I took that out
Well,
so I could
when I
hear better.
came, there was one baseball team up to Castile Park. Now, they've got 3 diamonds, they've got a basketball court, they have a tennis court, they have a park pavilion, which
Is anybody
has
saying about that?
access for all the kids to have summer recreation. They have accessible to the Letcher School, which has a pool.
Right.
These are all positive.
Yep. Facilities at the school have improved greatly, and the
Right,
park is
right.
an excellent place to take kids and
That
watch a ball.
baseball diamond you're speaking about up there, the boys wanted to play ball, they did everything themselves. Made the bases, and they used to have a big board about that long, an oak board they hooked behind their own personal car and dragged that around to smooth the diamond out. They didn't wait for somebody else to do it, they did it themselves.
Mr. Arsdale,
I think that the general upkeeping of the houses and the lawns and the shrubbery in Castile has improved with the times. We've got these modern mowing machines that run much more easily, and we get our lawns mowed, and lots of pretty shrubs and gardens around.
Mr. Golyer?
Well, they got a new Boy Scout building, which is a plus.
That's true.
So glad to see that the Boy Scouts are still active.
Absolutely. Mr. Weiss?
This isn't necessarily just about Castile, but through the 20s here, we used to see horse and buggies quite a lot, and we were seeing the beginning of the automobile age We saw many Model T Fords, and I think of the improvements that were made in all automobiles from that time. I saw the Model T Ford with the old, didn't have a transmission like cars, a different kind, and I remember when the Model A came out with, and then pretty soon we had the Ford V8. The great improvement during that time, the times that we've been alive. And through the 20s, the automobile industry and our roads. I remember when some of the streets right in here in Castile, people get stuck in the mud right up on Mill Street. I remember one day we got stuck right in the middle of Mill Street in the mud. So we had improvement on the roads, that's for sure.
That's for sure.
Yep.
Yes.
Ray? Ray?
Can't hear you.
Yeah.
Can't.
I can't hear
My
you.
old Model T could beat those new 37 Fords.
He says a Model T could beat these 37 Fords.
Bud
You remember
Johnson,
the 1913 Buick I had?
Bud Johnson and Rodney Squires used to think they could beat me, but they never could. I could go cross lots a lot faster than that old Ford of theirs.
Ms. Barlow or Ms. Baker, anything
Well, I
to
think
add to
they've
the
mentioned
list?
most of them, but I think there's still a lot of good community spirit and friendliness in the town.
Sure.
After living other places, I appreciate it.
Mr. Weiss?
I don't know how I was talking here, but I don't think one of the biggest improvements we had in Castile was when the Iroquois Gas Company put the gas line through Castile. In those days, the women had oil-burning kitchen stoves, and sometimes they'd get out of hand and catch fire. And I remember when the Iroquois Gas Company came in and put the gas line through, and they didn't have any of these mammoth backhoes like we had when we were putting the sewage in here. The men were digging this by hand. Of course, the gas line didn't have to go down below the frost line like the water line does. But we got the gas line through, and then the women all had good kitchen stoves. And at first, we didn't have gas furnaces. One of my memories is when John Eddy or Carol Randall, who had brought coal into the village, and we could always tell in the neighborhood when somebody was refurnishing their coal bin, because they'd come up to the house and they'd put the chute down the window into the cellar, and you'd hear the shovel, and they'd hear it going down the chute, and then you'd hear it going down into the bin. And that was a familiar sound we used to hear. I don't know if any of you can remember that. You'd shovel the coal and put it up there, and you'd hear it going down the chute and coming down into the cellar. I can remember that song. You knew when anybody in the neighborhood was getting coal. Yeah.
Everybody must remember the Market Basket store and Couch's restaurant. I worked in both of them. And in Couch's, they served meals from a 2-burner stove. Everything. They made roast beef, everything. And I think everybody remembers them. Some of you, anyway.
How about some negative changes that you've seen over the years? Some things we may have lost or some things that may need to go
Buildings, I just hate to see all these buildings come down, and like the town hall, that just broke my heart when they got rid of that, because that was a big part of my life.
That's right.
Everything took place in it. And when I was in school, we didn't have an auditorium, so my class was the last class that graduated from there.
Yeah.
Ray was in that
Our
too.
class.
Uh-huh.
I was the first to graduate in the new
New school,
new school.
in the new auditorium at this
That's right.
school. And, well, the school's gone, the churches, the pretty churches that we used to have are gone. And the sanitarium over there is just a heap, a pile. That breaks my heart.
The Methodist
School
church.
went down there for the operettas to practice.
The operators, all our school dances, all our school affairs were held. And once, every now and then, some company would come to town and bring the costumes and the play, and everybody in the town would where a lot of the people in the town would take part in usually an operetta of some kind. And half the town would be in it and the other half would come and watch it. And that was a lot of fun. I remember when George Sherman was the burpee bird dancing back and forth across the stage.
I remember Tommy Fagan was a rat when we did a Pied Piper. And we made all those costumes at school, the homemaking classes made them. Well, the rats were all going around on stage. And his split in the back. He didn't know it, he kept on going.
Anybody else?
No, not.
Mr. Bennett?
Like some of them have said, we've lost a lot of businesses. When we used to have about 5 grocery stores, now we have 1. And we used to have 3 or 4 doctors in town. We don't have those. We used to have 3 or 4 gas stations.
In a drugstore, Jim.
Cut down.
Yes.
In a drugstore.
One
Right.
drugstore.
The blacksmith shop is gone, and I remember driving the team up to be shod. Went to first grade in the horse and buggy part of the time, and the first school bus was a state truck with a canvas over it and planks on potato crates, and we climbed up in the back of that and sat down.
Ms. Little?
I think it's changed in that you don't know everybody anymore. There's a lot more people moving in and out. And when I was a young girl, I could probably tell you who lived in every house on Main Street. And that's impossible, for me anyway,
True.
anymore.
Right. Mr. Ballinger, Mr. Hall?
Getting back to your last question about the positive changes, look around you. This portion of the library, it wasn't here. There wasn't the opportunity for the kids before. We had the one building out the front. Now they have all this. They have computers. Ample opportunity.
Sure. Ms. Hoyt and the library board did a great job with this building, and it's a great place to come. I know my kids love it here as well as that. I think I'll combine the next one, since we've talked about local businesses that have seemed to have gone. What are some other local businesses that aren't here anymore? We've already talked about that a little bit, other than the doctor's offices and the supermarkets. What are some other local businesses that seem to be something that we miss?
We had 3 barbers, I think, at least at one time.
Yeah.
3, 4. That's a lot.
There was a dry cleaner on the corner, and I went to school with one of their daughters, and we spent a lot of time on the corner up here for the dry cleaners, and we would make games out of trying to name the kind of car that was coming over the hill before it got down to where the dry cleaners was. That was when there weren't so many models of every car.
Mm-hmm.
There's one type of business that changed a little bit. Mr. Finney had some chickens right by the school, and Ray Weiss's dad had chickens. I think George Dixon had a family cow, and all these areas around Wolf Creek and around town is growing brush. I think they were pastures.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the last of the horses, I think.
Was there ever a movie theater in Castile?
Town hall.
The town hall.
Yes, in the town hall. They were silent movies, excuse me. They
Mr.
were,
Weiss?
Talking about gas stations, there was a gas station down on the corner of what used to be Water Street and Lover's Lane, right next to the creek there. Bantam's gas station, and there was a sign on it, last chance to fill up before you get to Letchworth Park. But the thing I can remember about that gas station, different than the ones today, there was a pump handle there, and the man that was going to get you gas pumped the handle like this, and the gas went up into a glass. There was a glass tank up here at the top that was calibrated, and he wanted 5 gallons of gas, he'd pump up there till he got 5 gallons, then he'd take the hose and the gravity feed into your tank. And I believe that little gas station is still sitting down in back of where the cider mill is there.
Okay, yeah.
They moved the building part down there.
I'm sure fuel was a little less expensive then, too.
Yep.
Yeah.
An awful lot of more changes in the businesses around town that I can think of. I can name a lot of them.
Let's hear a couple more. We have time. Can you think of any more?
Well, I don't know as you call it a business, but I guess it was, the Castile Sanitarium used to be a really large business. They get people for the water cure from New York City and all around, and that has slowly gone down.
There were always people, when we walked home from school, there were always ladies or somebody, you couldn't tell, they were all wrapped up sitting on the porch there. Like maybe 6 of them on the porch, every day. Dr. Mary, that was one of her things that she liked to do. She thought everybody should get fresh air. Well, by golly, they did.
Water. Lots of water.
The grist mill on Wolf Creek, I remember being in it while it was operating, and there was a creamery in town on Water Street, and of course the foundry's long gone. I don't remember any of the foundry. How about the foundry, Ray? Was that gone?
Where they made cast chiller plows. A building, I can remember the building being there just over the creek from where I said that gas station was just across the creek from there. I can remember that building, but what I can remember back, the man that run it was Frank Shoemaker, I think was his name, wasn't it? He lived in that house there, but it wasn't running as a plow company at that time, but it had been.
He was my uncle. Frank Shoemaker was my uncle. Great uncle, I should say.
We used to, speaking of things we did, on a Saturday, we'd all hike down to Letchworth Park and ski on Snake Hill until we were so tired we could hardly get home. And on a Sunday afternoon, be 15, 20 people swimming at Upper Falls. And we could dive off the rocks.
My dad took us there all the time.
I think probably liability stopped all these things. All
Right,
the fun.
right.
You really had made it when you dared to duck under the falls because it was all hollow under there. The boys did it first, and I finally decided, I'm going to do it too, so you just hold your breath under. It was great.
Yes, sir.
My first job was for Mr. Hitchcock at 10 cents an hour.
Doing what?
He had a big garden.
Mr. Weiss, you wanted to say something?
There was, at one time, there was a cider mill just across the railroad tracks where the grain elevators are now. And back across on the other side of Main Street, I think it's where Pat Squires lives now, there was we called the evaporator. They evaporated apples and made dried apples out of them. Several of the women in the village used to work there. And where Agway is now was Phillips Brothers apples. They had apples from the Glen Iris fruit farm. And there was a cooper shop over in back of this mill here, John Eddy's feed mill there, to where they made barrels. I remember then there was an older man used to make barrels for the apples to put back apples in.
What used to be across from my house at the end of East Mill Street, I think there was a building there. Where the wastewater treatment is now.
Litzak Lumber.
Litzak Lumber was there, the building that was there before.
I started there in '62, working there, and then the long building right along the creek is where the sawmill used to be, but there were other saws in there, and we still use them. I started there, but it was converted over to electricity. It wasn't run by water power. And then they moved up to where they are now on the railroad tracks, and well, they were starting in '62, mostly in '63, we moved up there, moved all our business. We were close to the tracks. We used to unload lumber up there and bring it down to where the wastewater plant is. But once we moved up there, everything was closer by, and we had quite a lumber business. One other business that's disappeared, nobody's mentioned it, is sitting right there. It was Ray Weiss and his dairy business.
Yeah.
Obviously, with time, he couldn't do it anymore, but like she said, I remember him coming to the house delivering milk, and she said it would freeze in the wintertime, and you'd go out there to
Cats
get...
would go around and lick where it is.
Right, the milk would freeze, and the cap would be up in the air 2 inches or so, and I don't know what time of morning they delivered that milk, but...
On the 4th of July, they delivered the milk, and everybody in town, they dropped off a firecracker in front of your house and woke everybody up in town.
We used to sleep in the tent, my brothers and I, out the back of our house, and we'd have firecrackers, and we'd go down to Jim and Arsdale's in the morning and try to, we'd see whether we could get down there and shoot firecrackers under their tent, or they'd be up and shoot some under our tent. But talking about the milk business there, when my dad bought out the milkman, there was a man that was hearing, he couldn't hear, he couldn't speak, and everybody in town called him Dummy Webster. But we didn't do it in a derogatory manner. If
That was
we'd
his
ever
name.
called somebody that today, we'd be ostracized. But he was a man, and he had a horse and a regular milk delivery truck. And when we got that milk business, we got that delivery truck, but we didn't have a horse. But we had a Model T Ford, and all the early delivering of our milk was in the back seat of that Model T Ford.
The Dummy Webster always came to the silent movies. He just loved them. Of course, it was made for him. It's like the caption on the TV now. And he always sat down in the front rows, right in the middle of all the kids. And when it got exciting, he was just jumping right up and down because it was just made for him. And his name was Dummy Webster.
For Memorial Day, it's a good question for this time. What was Castile like during wartime? Do you have any stories of what Castile was like during, say, World War II? Do you have any remembrances
Well,
of?
parachutes were made up on the corner of Mill Street and Main Street there, that blank open space. There was a factory there.
Do a cast iron knitting now there.
Oh, okay. The old silk mill.
Right.
Of course, they used to watch for
Old Bill
planes.
Morgan's garage. Old Bill Morgan wore his glasses always up here. And of course, we lived on Hurd Street, so pennies were scarce, but if you could ever get 5 of them together, you could go down to Old Bill Morgan's, and he had a glass case there, and he would show you what he had. Well, we went on this trip one day, my sister and I had 5 cents and she had 5 cents, and we each bought a candy bar and took it home. It had sat there so long that it was wormy. We had wasted 5 whole pennies on a wormy candy bar.
There are 3 ladies in town that were getting photographs to send to us. And that was much appreciated. Miss Abigail Johnson, Mrs. Fred Ferris, and
McTurney.
McTarney.
Yeah.
Mrs. Baker, Mrs. Barlow?
I came back here during the war and stayed here with my children while my husband was overseas. And we used to go and watch for planes. Now, why exactly, I don't know, but I know we were taught how to identify planes by their sound and by their shape. And we would go out of town, right on the edges of town where the lights wouldn't bother you, and sit there for hours watching for planes.
Did they tell you in school what the shape and color?
We didn't go to school,
No.
I don't know.
No.
We learned it, I think it was through the Legion Auxiliary things that I did that.
Uh-huh.
The,
You had to make sure that your windows were all tight whenever they
Blackouts.
blacked out.
Mrs. Big?
The monument is for my uncle Addison Wallet, and he was killed in the First World War a month before I was born. And so Kenny's great uncle. Yeah. They're having a service there tomorrow.
Great. Anyone else? Some wartime?
Well, there were two trains. Imagine that, the Erie passenger trains. And I was born at 30, so it was when I was a preteen, I guess. But my mother would let me go to Buffalo. I must have driven to supper, else we walked early in the morning, like 6 a.m. to get that train. And my friend Jane and I, we would save up till we had $5. Now, that was a lot of money back then, $5. But that would pay for our train, and we'd get up to Buffalo, and we'd walk up Main Street. And there were a lot of vagrants there on the sidewalk, but nothing was open. So we go to March of Dimes, or March of Time, is that what you call it? And see the news. You know, there was the war news and all. Then we'd go up and shop, and we could buy a pair of shoes and have lunch at Oppenheim Collins and come back, and we'd get back after dark. Now, it amazed me that my mother would have let me done that.
Right.
We never felt in jeopardy or anything. There was a lot of servicemen on the train, too. So,
Everybody was your friend.
pardon?
Everyone was your friend. You never worried about
Yes, right,
things like
right.
that.
Or even in the big city, we were just
No.
country kids, you know?
The day that it was announced that the war was on, we were living down on what was called the old Pierce Farm. But it's the last farm, that big house down near the waterworks, as you leave town. Nobody had lived there for 20 years, and the reason it was called the Pierce Farm was because Pierce was the banker. And I remember 6 o'clock at night that Charlie Irvingham, who lived across the street from us, came over and knocked on our door and announced it to us and told us to turn our radios on, so we did. And then, of course, in those blackouts, you had to make sure that nothing showed. Well, one night, just outside my bedroom window, somebody had walked up the driveway and was leaning against the telephone pole that was there, and I could see him light up with a cigarette. And it was about 9 o'clock, and we must have been going through these drills about 2 or 3 months anyway. And I thought, do I wake my mother? Do I tell her what's going on? Or do I just try to handle it myself? So I stepped up to that window and did like this and said, "Get for the hills, mister, if you want to live long." He took off. He was gone.
We respected our teachers and looked to our teachers as role models more than they're being respected today.
Sure. Right. Any other role models, heroes, famous people maybe became famous from Castile or popular?
We had baseball heroes, you know, Babe Ruth was certainly a great home run hitter, and before that he was one of the best left-handed pitchers, but I wouldn't call him my role model, because he was also famous for his drinking and that sort of thing. But there's two baseball players that I thought Lou Gehrig was another one, but in his family life was much better. He was a good role model, but there were two that I remember. One was a pitcher by the name of Christy Mathewson, and he had promised his mother that he wouldn't play baseball on Sunday, and he pitched, I think it was for the Philadelphia Athletics, and they got into some real important games, and he stuck to that promise that he'd made. When you think of the baseball players today and what they do and everything, there's some great ones that are still good role models, but that man, I don't know if he was necessarily a Christian himself, but it was the fact that he had made that promise to his mother, and he stuck with it, even when he was offered a lot more money if he'd play, I think, in World Series games. And another man that stood up about the same way was Hank Greenberg. He was a Jewish player, and Saturday is the Jewish Sabbath, and he refused to play baseball on Saturday. And he was offered extra money in the World Series games to play on Saturday, and he wouldn't do it. But I think later on, in some later game, he and the rabbi made some kind of arrangement where it was all right for him to do it. But he stood up for what he believed, and I don't think some of our baseball players do that today, or any of our athletes. It's how much money they can make.
It certainly has been a big change in sports as far as that's concerned, that's for sure.
One of the things they never covered in college is what do you do when a child throws up in class? Well, in, what was that second grade teacher who went to be the librarian? Saunders. Miss Saunders, second grade. I went in and she left. And 3 kids got up to practice because they were going to be in a little program. And the little girl in the middle, she had a gathered sleeve like this, and she upchucked, and of course it got all in here like this. I didn't know you were supposed to call a custodian. I'm hustling her into the little John. All the other kids, I didn't know what happened to them until I finally came out with her, and they all had gotten Kleenexes from the desk, from the teacher, and they had the Kleenex and their heads were down. They all did that automatically. They looked like little sailboats almost. But inside the John there, I was getting sick. She would move her head, and I would take my turn. I'd back up, she'd take her turn. Back and forth like this. And I was trying to clean up her clothes for her. I wish they'd covered it in class and told me to call a custodian.
Would have been helpful.
I've never made that mistake again.
We've heard some school stories, but Mr.
I'll just ask Dick if he's got any memories up there.
Hello up there. Any fond memories of Castile to add from above?
Lots of them. All fairly good ones.
He only said fairly.
There's a chair down.
Come on down, sir, if you wish.
You mentioned about Doc Baker doing things for free. I don't know if he was a role model or not, but John Sherman delivering coal all those years. If you didn't have money for your coal, he'd say, okay, I'll collect it later. And then I was told, I knew John, but I was told that years and years he never ever collected a lot of money for coal, so he supplied coal for heat for people that couldn't afford it over the years. Nowadays, the bill for your heat and oil or whatever comes immediately, and you've got about 10 days to pay that, and if you don't pay it, they'll shut you off or something.
Right.
Also, many times when he would deliver that coal, you'd see a family that was hard up and didn't have food, and the next thing you know, he'd show up with a big basket of food for them.
Right. He was pretty kind-hearted and helped a lot of people out. He ran the coal building up behind what's now the Agway building. I remember that. And they'd put the coal up in the top, and it would run down. Somebody mentioned about hearing the coal being delivered, but I remember being up there as a kid. You could hear the coal running down the chute into their truck, and then he'd take off and deliver it. John was a character as far as I'm concerned. I was walking down the street one day, and he stopped me, and he says, "What are you doing?" And I says, "Nothing. Come on." And he'd take me somewheres, and in a station wagon, he always drove station wagons. In the back was a tire for the truck. He'd have one of his trucks that have a flat tire somewheres, and he'd pick me up off the street, go change the tire on his truck, and he'd give me $1 or something and fix the tires. But then again, he helped other people out, you know. He was a good-hearted fella.
Tell you, his cash system, right when it out, right pocket was in cash, left pocket was out low. Really, truthfully.
That's the way it kept.
Counting has changed.
Does anyone remember, excuse me, I have a frog, the bean factory up at the Erie, where they sorted beans, and the women worked there and sorted beans as they went through.
That's-
Doesn't anyone remember that?
That's where the evaporator, where the apple place was. It was also a bean house
Bean house. Yeah.
later.
Then the restaurant next, I lived across the street, and the restaurant next door, Baxler's, Basler's, where they served ice cream in the front. And my mother wouldn't let us go over there. And we thought they just served ice cream. And in the back door, quite a few men went in there, and we found out they served beer. Does anyone remember that?
There's about 3 places in
Remember?
Castile you can get.
Yeah.
Jack's
Well,
Place.
they-
Remember Jack's
They could
Place?
serve beer for a very
I
short
sat out in
time.
the car a lot of times, wait.
Jack Robinson's.
Yeah.
Getting back to baseball, used to have, pretty good games up here, and they had a league all the way around the neighboring counties. Well, Saunier had a pretty good baseball team. They'd come over and play here, and they, once in a while, want to have a seizure, on the field or somewhere. All they did then, they dragged him over behind the bleachers, let him get over it, and somebody took his place. They didn't call an ambulance or Medic 80 or anything like that. Pretty soon the guy had come struggling out.
I was married on the 30th of June, and we went on a honeymoon, but we had to cut it short and be back before the 4th of July because Frank had to play in that baseball game.
Yeah.
Well, kids used to earn money running a trap line for muskrat or coon, and I remember a bunch of them tapped the maple trees and boiled down sap, and I remember Hiram Preston worked for Mr. Hubbard, stocking groceries and everything. I don't think he's more than 12 years old, and now they're afraid work will hurt kids. John Campbell said if they don't learn to work before puberty, they never do learn how. The kids like to work and earn money. It's a great thing.
Yeah. Corky and I both had paper routes.
I used to deliver the Buffalo News. And talking about ice cream, the only place when we were growing up, in the younger generations, was at Cummings Pharmacy,
Right.
where Midge's husband and she used to
My
run.
father, my grandfather, and my husband.
I had a double dip cone one day, and there was a big open, what do you call those big registers, where the heat comes up. And I dumped my ice cream accidentally down there, and your dad gave me a free ice cream cone. I was so heartbroken. Such was life back then,
Speaking of the pharmacy there, they used to have a great big telephone pole there, and when we were running around with this Model T I was telling you about, we used to park it there and a bunch of guys go to Silver Springs or something like for something to do, I came back one day and my car was hanging on the pole. They got hay rope, and Gussie and Johnson there, they hung that sucker up there on the pole.
It reminds me of Halloween. There was always a car up on top of the schoolhouse or a machinery of some kind every Halloween, and outhouses in front of all the bank and the stores. And the next morning, everybody went down and cleaned it up and put them away for the next year.
What was the name of that lady on Liberty Street where they
Effie Clue.
tipped it over on
She had
Halloween?
an
She was
outhouse,
in it.
everybody tipped it over, so one year she went out and sat in it.
She was in
And they
it.
tipped it over with her and
Tipped it over. It's a Halloween prank tradition that started a long time ago.
They got out of hand.
The outhouses are few and far between to be found anymore.
That's for sure. Mr. Bernardsdale, did you have any heroes you want to mention growing up, or people you looked up to locally? Or?
No, you were asking about famous people that came from the area. He's not exactly Castilian, but right next door, David Starr Jordan, who became the president of Stanford University, grew up here, right next door to us. And I think Dr. Cordelia Green was one of the first women doctors in New York State.
Frank Walkley is Commissioner of Agriculture, and he's right here.
Mm-hmm.
And Bernard Coleman lived outside on 39 toward Perry, top the hill. And he joined the Army, I think, in 1940.
Betty Brown's.
And when he retired, he's a chicken colonel, that is a full colonel. And he's commanding officer of Fort Bragg, was it? Or was it the infantry school, I think. So that was quite a lot for an enlisted man to do.
Yes.
Cal, wasn't there a Jeb, one of the Jeb family?
Oh,
that
Frank,
was,
or Fred
Frank
Flater.
Flater.
Reservation.
He gave us the Whaley Tavern sign, and he was an executive officer in the Curtis Wright Company during
Yeah.
World War II. You probably remember him.
Mm-hmm.
He came here as a speaker one time at the community club.
He was Mrs. Jebb's.
Frank
I
Jeb.
know, we
So-
got back in here, but
Talk about Fred Flater,
Oh,
Jebb's.
Fred Flater, yeah,
Ray and
I
I
remember
were
about that.
schoolmates,
Yeah.
and I lived up on top of the hill, and he lived right below us, right up the
right
next
up
place
the
here.
next building up here.
So we've been friends ever since we
You've
were
been-
about that high.
I was 2 years old when we moved here from Brooklyn, and we lived in that house right next door there. Dr. Mary had hired my mother and dad to come up here. I don't know how that ever happened, but the house mother and boarding housekeeper and groundskeeper for that house there was called Reston Cottage. And it was a place for extra people that were staying in the sanitarium over here. And that's where I was two years old. I was born in Brooklyn, and we came here in 1920. And I've lived here in Castile ever since. And Marietta was my first playmate. She lived up over the hill. We lived down there, and she lived up over the hill, and she used to come down and get me in trouble. She was older. She was older than 1 year older than I just turned 90, and she's going to turn 91 in a few months. So we go way back, and we graduated from high school the same year in 1935.
Speaking of high school, what was school life like before the formation of Letchworth Central? I know there was a school in about every small town around, Bliss, and I don't know if Pike had a school, Castile had a school.
You could walk home for
Going on
lunch.
the radio.
You could walk home
anything
for
you
lunch, that's good stuff.
That was the sense of community that I mentioned.
Mhm.
And I think maybe the school was the heart of it because the kids all knew each other. And it was the center of everything.
Oh, of course, when we were in there were no school buses, so there were no such thing as a snow day.
Right.
You were to get there every day, and it was up to you to get there. The only time that I can remember in all the years I was in school, that the school was closed, the wind blew the windows in up on the second floor, and we had a few days off till they got the windows back in. Those were the only snow days we ever had.
Well, the classes were a lot smaller. Our graduating class in 37 we had 13 people in it. We weren't centralized then. We had fewer subjects than they have now up there, and we had a lot less equipment.
Oh, sure. Yeah. I have a class period of 29 now in one class period where I teach, so it's a lot different.
As far as athletics were concerned, we didn't have football, but we had a game called speedball that we played in the fall.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we played basketball and baseball.
And
No
speedball.
track.
That speedball was worse than football. I think it was rougher than football.
Is it like
They
rugby?
no
or
equipment.
what is
It was a
speedball?
combination of
Like
soccer and
cricket or
soccer and football.
Did you play against each other, like Bliss versus Castile and basketball?
Yes,
and different towns.
That window blew in on the 7th of March, 1929, on my brother Willard's birthday. And as I understand, evacuated the study hall, and a few minutes later, when the window came in, some of the desks were crushed right to the floor.
Yeah. Yeah, my brother was in one of the desks, right? Just didn't roll the window frames in. There was concrete and bricks that all came in, and that whole row of desks that was right next to the wall was crushed right down. But Prof had just come into that room and said, it's getting cold in here, you better get down to the boiler room. My brother was in one of those seats.
Frank Barlow, too.
And Marietta's husband, future husband, was in one of those seats, and Fay Randall and Chad Hickey, and I can just name them. And that whole row of seats were crushed right down big. We were in the 5th and 6th grade room. The room took face out towards Washington Street, and that was sort of towards the south, and this was coming in from the west. And when that thing blew in, we looked out the window, and window curtains and school books and everything were flying by that window. So that wasn't just a window blowing in. It was a whole. It took quite a while for that to get fixed and back to school. So the Lord was certainly with that bunch of kids there when they got out of there.
In first grade, I was in first grade, and they brought us down to the basement, and the teacher said, "Now you go right straight home." So I dug out. I was way down on Fuel Road. Dad came along, blizzard to my back. I was used to walking home, and the whole town was looking for me.
Remember eating lunch in the boiler room? That was our cafeteria. On benches was nothing except your lap. And how we did, as younger, wish that we could get one of those bigger girls to sit next to us, so we would try to save a spot.
We were sitting on the asbestos pipes in that boiler room when it was cold. That Mr. Tyler was the janitor, and he was my aunt's father, so he would let us come in to get warm. And we'd sit on those asbestos pipes, and here we are. I'm 90, I'm still here.
Younger levels could sit up on the Weiss bench, you know, that was up higher. And about 4 people could sit up there.
What about social events in school? Did the Castile school have a prom or school dances?
Oh, yes.
Any memories of
In the
that?
town hall,
Mhm.
sometimes.
And different schools would give tickets, like arcade and all, and most of the kids didn't like to dance like Hal and I did, so we got the tickets most of the time.
Yeah.
And we dressed up, long dresses and corsages. You know, it was highlights.
We had a glee club. I loved the singing in the glee club.
Square dances were big, and those were fundraisers for us. Back then, even Kelly's Old Timers. But then some of the bands were pretty awful, but we raised money. We took on our senior trip.
Yeah. What are some senior trip memories? Where
We
did you
got to go to New York City, and he was the last Castile High School class, weren't you? They got to go to New York City, but then they didn't have it during the war, but I got to go to Washington on the train.
They go on some amazing senior trips these days, that's for sure.
Oh.
My senior trip was to Darien Lake,
Oh. My senior trip went down to D.C. on our first night down there. You know, they said, well, you can go out and go do whatever you want. This young woman and I went to a place to have a bite to eat, and that was the time that Chubby Checker was popular. He was playing at that.
Oh, wow.
He probably doesn't know who Chubby Checker is.
Oh, yes, I do. No.
We went to DC, and we got on a tour bus to go somewhere while we were there, and we were in a traffic jam, and one of our seniors could do a perfect imitation of a fire siren. And we sat there, and the traffic was blocked all 4 ways. Nobody was moving. Anyway, he stuck his head out the window and let loose with this siren, and everybody moved off to the side, thought there was a fire truck coming, and the bus driver says, "I can't believe this," and off he went with it. And we did have a reunion. That's when Mr. Vogel was one of our advisors or whatever. Anyway, we had a reunion here back in probably the 80s or so, And he asked this fellow, he says, can you still do that? 'Cause anyway, he did right there during this reunion. And just as good as he did back in 61, I guess it was.
That's a useful skill to have.
That's a very youthful skill to have.
For graduations, the junior class always decorated for the seniors. Remember, everybody went out and gathered all their peonies and anything else that you could find in bloom and made these baskets full to put on the stage. But Calvin knows all about my graduation. Calvin was my rescuer. We went on our junior senior picnic in the park. Was on a Friday night. And 4 of us went on bicycles because we thought that, 6 of us went on bicycles because gas was so scarce. The war was on. Well, we rode our bicycles down there, 6 of us. Coming back, we thought, wouldn't it be nice, we were at the Upper Falls, wouldn't it be nice if we rode through the park and went out the other end? Wouldn't that be great? Dummies, nobody went through the park at that time because nobody had the gas. So here we were, and then going down that hill, Wolf Creek. I had a borrowed bicycle. Joyce Duber lent me her bicycle. And I hit that wall, like the brakes burned out. I hit that wall on the bottom, went right over the top of the wall. There was a big explosion where the tire blew. I happened to be the last in the bunch as people are riding, and the rest of them all stopped and turned, and they couldn't see me anyplace. They saw the broken bicycle. I had gone over the wall. Well, by that time, Bob Conley and Ted Swain decided that they should go and get help. And so they were going to ride, and they went to Calvin's place. In the meantime, I'm getting very antsy because I'm lying down, and the other 2 girls that were there were trying to take care of me, but they didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to do, and it was this knee right here that was just wide open. I looked down, and you could see this. And Castle Smith was the other boy. He stayed with us, and he kept going down to the creek and getting his handkerchief wet and bringing it up. And I kept lying there and lying there and lying there, and I kept telling him, I'm going to get up because this isn't doing any good at all. And we just waited and waited and waited. Well, those boys going up the hill, they said that they could hardly make it because they would think that they weren't going fast enough if they were walking their bikes. So they'd get on, and they weren't going fast enough then, and they went hopping back and forth on their bikes, collapsed on Calvin's lawn. And, of course, I'm still lying down there like that. And the handkerchief keeps coming with water. He told me later that his mother always made him take a clean handkerchief wherever he went. It was the only time he ever used it. But Calvin comes, and I'm lying on the ground, and here's this wall like this. Calvin jumps up on top of the wall from that side, the roadside. And I look up, it looked like a giant that had come to rescue me. He hopped down, and you had just finished a first aid course at college. So my eyes were right next to his pant leg. No, first they cut down 2 trees about like this. I thought, what are they cutting the trees down for? Why don't they take care of me? Well, they were trying to make the splints to go on each side. So here's Calvin, and my eyes were right even with his pant leg. His jackknife comes out, and he starts like this, and tears round and round and round and round and round like that. What is he tearing up his pants for? Well, they put that on like this, and Calvin and Gene Kingsley, who couldn't carry a fly, but the 2 of them carried me out around the end of the wall and loaded me in the back of his car. Go up to Doc Baker's, and Doc Baker says, take her right to Warsaw. Says, that's a splendid job done on that first aid. So I get to the hospital, thinking, oh, this is going to be fixed so easily, so quickly. Well, that was my first experience in the hospital, really having something done. They had these sticks went clear up here, First thing they do, get out scissors, they're gonna cut my underpants off. No, you're not, they're brand new for graduation. Those are my first brand new underpants in a long time. So I made them pick out over over those sticks that were there. And I kept thinking, oh, well then I'll go home tomorrow, Well, no, I didn't go home on the morrows. And got to be Sunday. Graduation was Monday. I thought, oh, well, I'll be okay the next day. No, I was 2 weeks in the hospital. But the hospital allowed at 11 o'clock at night for the whole class to come over with flowers from the stage. They came up to the old hospitals each.
She was valedictorian, she probably won't tell you that, but I remember that.
Well, the nurses were all crying because I couldn't go to graduation. My neighbor down there sent a pink bed jacket because she couldn't imagine me graduating in a hospital gown. So at 11 o'clock, they come, and Hal's father was on the Board of Education, and he presented me with my diploma lying on a stretcher. And I'll never forget, it was so hot. You could always smell the hot dog stand across the street in the hospital. And it just would make you so hungry. Well, there I am, all dolled up, corsage, everything, laying on this stretcher. And along comes this head nurse that was supposed to be the rottenest, hardest, cruelest person of all. And I thought, what do I do now? I'm all tight in here. And she said, well, what's going on with you? They've got you here in this hot day, just wrapped like an Egyptian mummy. She ran her hand down the side like this and ripped those things right off, just like an Egyptian mummy. And kept going round, all the way around. So here's those blankets, those sheets. That's in my graduation picture. But I just will never forget that hospital allowed at 11 o'clock at night a whole class to come in there.
Very nice.
That Wolf Creek was badly polluted with coliform, and she was exposed to it. As I remember, about the next day I was in Navy uniform.
Yeah, that's what you told me before.
Yeah.
Does anybody
But
else
thank
have
goodness
any?
he was around then.
I think that's, the Lord lights those things up for us.
Mhm.
I think you're right.
Right. Any questions or comments from the audience before we wrap things up today? Or does anybody have anything else? Mr. Wallace?
Well, sitting here listening to all this is just great for me because I've lost my parents and I used to love to listen to them reminisce. And now that I've listened to some of these wonderful stories, I'm thinking that Castile's greatest treasure sits right here. And that we should encourage all of you to write your memoirs. All your memories when you're younger, and we all want to read them. It would be the best book that you could buy in Castile.
Very nice articles about the Cummings Pharmacy.
I just gave Jackie a book to look at. I took a class in writing memoirs one time, and they got me started, and I've written quite a few things.
Speaking of that, since the memoir writing came up, next week, Sunday, June 1st, here at the library, there's a memoir writing workshop for adults put on by the New York Council for the Arts. If you want to spread the word, I have some flyers that we can give out to you. I believe it's called Poets and Writers, a part of the New York Council for the Arts. It will be a nice program here. I believe it's here at the Castile Library. We have some flyers that look like this we'll be handing around. I'm sure that it'll be interesting for people to come to that. Any other questions or comments from the audience, or anybody have anything else to add today? Anything that we forgot to talk about?
I wanted to ask Hal about how did the road that he lives on now, how did it get its name? It's called the Golyer Road.
Oh, yeah.
What do you mean, the Golyer Road?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's not our fault. Warren Loomis put that up, took down Jackson Road, and it's really too bad it happened because it was an affront to the Jackson families. Never felt right about it.
dad used to measure his well or something, that somehow they kept track for the
Well, he
US?
measured the river,
Measured the river?
and then when the dam went in, measured groundwater in a place in Letchworth Park. There was a U.S. Geological measuring station in St. Helena, in which recorded a 7-day graph of the level of the river. And that way they could calculate the volume of water going down the river for any period of time. I think that's what you're referring to. People still lived in St. Helena then too. The Streeters, Marietta knew some of them, and Art Hopkins on the other side of the river. Some of you people may have remembered the Hopkins family. And
My father was born in the park. My grandfather worked for Mr. Letchworth.
Any other comments or questions from the audience today?
I also have one more question. I know tomorrow as we celebrate Memorial Day, and I just wondered if we have any war vets here in the audience, and if anybody would care to share, what was it like when World War II was first announced, if anybody has the memories of exactly where they were, what they were doing, what kind of emotions.
She's talking, we talked a little bit about World War II before, and she's mentioned Memorial Day, and she wondered if there were any veterans in the audience or among our guests that had anything to say about it.
Well, there's several I can see.
Yeah.
My mother had 5 in the World War II, and they all came back.
there's about 5 World War II veterans here, I believe. Did I miss anybody?
I know they had 11 sons, and they all came back. She had promised God if they came back that she would crawl up the church steps on her hands and knees in prayer, and she did.
There's a Lathrop family in Castile, Bob and Leon, and we were together in 4-H and went to the county fairs and had our stock, and they worked for Harry Randall, and both of them were killed the same month, one in Sicily, the other at Peleliu in the Marine Corps.
Cal's brother died during the war,
Willard.
and there were 2 others, Doris, who were the 2? Oh, there goes my mind.
Bob Jake's brother died in Korea, and I always kind of felt bad because I always feel like he's a forgotten man. I didn't really know him. Did you have? But he died in Korea. Yeah.
My brother was one of the first of many. He was killed February 9th, 42. So we just barely got started. It was an accident. He was a pilot, and they took off from Gunter Field with an English cadet, and the prop on the plane broke in 2. So he had to land, and he got it down all right and hit a ditch and flopped over and killed him. Bunny and I went down there to Montgomery, and they had English cadets and Free French, and there's a cemetery down there for foreign cadets were killed in training accidents, and there were 70 cadets buried in that one area, killed in training accidents. They were short of pilots, and they were ramming them through just as fast. We had practically no pilots when we started the war. So that was the first of many. I don't like to single out my brother very much because there were so many others. Just kept going on and on.
I wasn't here during the war. I was away in the Army. But I remember they were telling about the youth hostel up where the Boy Scout place is now. That was run by Arthur Chamberlain, and they used to have soldiers, or I guess trainees, from Canada and Australia
New Zealand.
and they'd come over and stay, and they would be entertained by the people in Castile.
We had suppers at the church for them and dances at the school. Those groups from New Zealand and Australia.
There were 3 that came from Canada once, and Art Chamberlain used to ask Jean Kingsley and my sister and I, when there were 3 boys, for us to come up and entertain the boys. Well, when it came time to go home, it was dark, and they had bicycles, and they insisted on seeing us home. Well, at that time, we lived out on 19A, not very long, but it was a long ride. But I'll never forget this guy. They called him Happy because his last name was Easter. So Happy Easter rode me home.
Any other wartime memories from Jackie's
Well,
question?
when Cal and I went down to Alabama, what he was talking about before, one of the things that really struck me was that this, the man that was in charge there that was talking to us said that these English students that were cadets that were learning to fly, most of them had never even driven a car. And you know, it was just so startling to me because here, any boy, you know, when he's 14, he knows how to drive a car. And it was just, you build up reflexes and you know a little bit more what to do. But here they are, learn to fly a plane, they don't even know how to drive a car. And it was, they were having a hard time.
Sure.
Speaking of that, I remember when I was, my job when I was in the military, I worked on war crimes trials, and we tried Japanese prisoners, or the people that ran the Japanese camp. And all I could think about all the time that we was going through these trials and the atrocities that they inflicted on our troops that they captured was the prison camp that was down in the park, and how well those German prisoners were treated. You know, I mean, they took them to the movies, they did everything, and here we're trying people that were just actually misusing the people, actually. They didn't feed them, and some of the things they done were certainly against the rules of the Geneva Convention, that's for sure. And,
They picked up potatoes for my father.
yeah, yeah.
Was it a large prison camp in the park? I didn't know that they had
Yeah, it was
a CCC camp to start with.
Right.
It was at the Lower Falls where the prison camp was, and then afterwards it was at the CC camp.
They would love it when they'd love to be out. They fought to get out. They get out, they'd rather pick up potatoes than stay.
Yeah.
What about when the war was over? Do you remember any celebrations or what was happening in the area when we learned that the war was over?
They did have a dinner, didn't they? I wasn't, we moved away, but they sent the boys a newsletter, and these 3 ladies he spoke about were in charge of that, and Mr. Reverend Dunlap printed it, and they sent them out to all the servicemen. And in those letters, they were always talking about having a dinner when they all got home, and I think they did have it, but we had left here by then and gone back to Buffalo, so I wasn't at the dinner, but I think they did have it. I'm not sure where or what it was about, because I wasn't here.
Any other questions or comments from anyone?
In the prison camps, they used to put on shows for people.
They used to go down there. My father was mail carrier, and we went down there. Why, I didn't go every day, but he did. And he was always invited to the shows, and I got to see 2 or 3 of them.
Dad had some prisoners of war helping them harvest. And they were threshing, they had 3 prisoners help thrash. And they told me about it afterward. Dad went out when they're going to eat, He said, "You're coming in the house." And the guard said they weren't supposed to. Dad says they are. And he brought them in. They sat right down with the rest of them. And each one went to thank my mother. Very gracious lady. That, I get weepy thinking about it.
Right. Sure.
I wasn't there.
I know they used to, they didn't take too good care of the roads from the prison camp out, and I remember they put them in 6x trucks. They put chains on all the wheels, and they come up out and they go by where Cal Road is. They come up out that way out of the park to Perry, but they come right up through there pushing snow, you know, and
Father used to go down to St. Lena every day. My father went down to St. Lena every day, you know, in a mail carrier.
Yeah.
That was quite a steep route, so every year he used to get new knobby tires to climb out of there with.
Ray Weiss and Rich Wells and I went overseas together in the same ship.
You just happened to see
We
each
were
other, didn't you?
in different outfits, and we saw each other.
Rich Wells and I were buck privates, and he was a captain or a lieutenant or something. And we slept on the deck sometimes. We took turns. But one day, Rich and I were walking by we were on the Manhattan. It was a luxury liner in peacetime, but they made it. It had a different name in wartime. And we walked by the exclusive dining quarters where the officers were eating. And we looked in there, and there was Jim and Arsdale. we caught his eye, and he came out and talked to us, even though he outranked us by quite a bit. and we met up with Jim 3 times in France and
North
in Italy.
Africa.
We met up with him several times. Unusual how things happen like that.
I saw you, Roy Hickey, in the Admiralty Islands off New Guinea.
Yeah.
And Morris Hotchkiss was on the USS Mississippi in the harbor, and he came over to our amphibious landing ship and had dinner with us.
It's an incredible coincidence. Anything else from anyone today? Any other questions or comments for our guests? I'd like to thank all of our guests for coming today to share their great stories. It's been interesting, educational. Like Mr. Wallace said, I think that some of these things should be written down so that they're never forgotten. Also, thanks to the audience for coming, and Jackie Hoyt and the library for putting on such an excellent program. Don't forget there's refreshments over here when we're finished.
Thank you too, because we love to talk about all this stuff.
Well, stop by my house anytime. Last house on the right on the east mill.